While Prop 19 went up in smoke last Tuesday, polls show most Californians still think prohibition's a bad idea. Is it only a matter of time before marijuana becomes legal in California? We'll cover that topic. Plus, is the zombie series The Walking Dead a sign of the apocalypse for the vampire craze? We can only hope. Don't move. It's the Annie Duke Show. Welcome to the Annie Duke Show. I'm your host, Annie. Helping me out and interacting with you throughout the show is Brian in the corner. Hi, Brian.
Hello, Annie.
I'm going to chat with you in a second. You look happy today.
I'm faking it.
You're faking it? I need to beat you down more, man. You look
it.
too pleased to be here. Today's main topic: last Tuesday, Californians rejected Prop 19, which would have legalized recreational marijuana use in the state. But a follow-up poll showed most Californians still think pot prohibition is a bad idea. Maybe they were all too high to go out and vote. Is it only a matter of time before it becomes law, or will Americans continue to snuff out legalization? If it does become legal, what new problems may we face? We'll discuss that. Plus, with the new hit series The Walking Dead getting rave reviews, could this mean the final end of the annoyingly inexplicable vampire craze? Whose corner are you in? Team zombies or team vampires? Joining in the discussion today, our featured interview, President and CEO of the groundbreaking After School All-Stars program, Ben Paul, who won't be talking about pot. And on our panel, Senior Editor of Reason Magazine and Reason.com, Brian Doherty, and California State Director of the Drug Policy Alliance, Stephen Gutwillig. So before we go any further, Brian, can you tell our audience how they can join in this discussion about education and pot? How did we end up, by the way, with two such inappropriate topics in the same show? I was thinking about that this week.
After school, pot, and zombies, it kind of all goes together.
It kind of
in a random way.
Well, people who enjoy zombie movies are often high, but it's how are we going to educate our children better?
Well, before we educate our children, I'm going to educate our viewers. And to interact with this show, at any time you want to chime in with a question, a thought, an opinion, just type in a Q, colon, and type your question away, and I'll get to it. And at some point during the conversation after Annie's interview with Ben, we'll be making a break to me and looking forward to your input.
That's right, and I think we have a fun clip today, don't we? That's going to come up.
Yes.
I'm excited about it. I don't know. I can't wait. Are you ready?
I am ready.
You're ready for the show?
It's your show.
You were in Vegas this weekend, weren't
I was
you?
in Vegas. I was at the World Series of Poker.
There was some little tournament going on or something,
little poker tournament,
right?
and I just drove back today. That's probably why I'm so happy I'm back in L.A.
That's probably true. Once you get out of Vegas, it is always nice to get back to L.A., I find. I was there on Friday night doing a symposium at UNLV Law School with my brother. Yeah, my brother and Jack Binion, a guy named Russell Saltzman, Joe Asher. We were talking about negotiation and poker. So nice. Stretching my intellectual side, and then I had to get back on Saturday to take my son to his playoff game, and the score was however much the other team could win by without getting penalized. You know, because the coaches get fined if the score goes too high.
High school football or Pop Warner?
It was a midget league.
Midget league.
Midget league, and so it was whatever the maximum allowable by midget law.
I didn't know your son was a midget.
My son lost by. Right. And then also, by the way, annoyingly, speaking of education, Ben, you'll like this. They were playing gangster rap in between the, plays, like when you normally have a TV timeout, except nobody was filming the game. They were playing gangster rap, and while they were talking about something about doing their mistress, I was a little bit alarmed. But then when they actually used the word MF, like very loudly, like, these are 12-year-olds playing football, I thought, this seems a little overboard in the musical choice.
Yeah, probably. They were trying to get all psyched up, but maybe they crossed some lines there.
I think so. It didn't, and by the way, my son, they weren't the youngest ones there because there were younger siblings there, like rocking out to.
It's hard to avoid. I play
I was like, what?
Jay-Z on my Pandora on my 4-year-old.
Yeah, right.
Repeatedly hears the F.
Where you're kind of like, stop, yeah. Right? Yeah. So anyway, but so I missed the whole brouhaha this weekend because I had to go take my son to his football game. That was That was the point of the very long round.
We're both back in LA.
We're both back in LA, and so happy that you're here, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
So, Ben Paul, you run After School All Stars,
Right.
which is, for the viewers at home,
After School All Stars is a national nonprofit organization. We provide free after-school programs for inner-city kids all across the country. We focus primarily on the middle school grades, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And we serve about 80,000 kids every day on 450 school sites in 12 cities ranging geographically from New York all the way to Honolulu.
Oh, wow. Don't the Hawaiian kids should be out surfing after school, shouldn't they?
That would be fun. You know, I think the problems are the ones that are busy doing drugs, not
yes,
the ones who are surfing.
Yes, I would say that would be the problem. So, you're providing, after school enrichment, obviously, homework support.
Right.
For these kids.
3 hours every day. We keep the kids on the school site for 3 more hours, and we do an hour of academic support. So it's either homework help or tutoring in the core subject matters that they're getting in school. We do an hour of enrichment programs, which would be anything from dance, music, art, cooking, fun activities. And then we do an hour of health and fitness. So that would be, sports, competitive, non-competitive sports, and just get the kids active.
So why, let me ask you, I think the main question is, obviously you're focused on some inner city public schools, right? Mm-hmm. So these are at-risk, disadvantaged youth on the whole. Why do we need this on top of what's happening in the school day?
That's a great question, and let me start by asking you a question, and then hopefully we can answer this together. So
I feel like I'm on the spot. Okay.
You are.
I like it.
So imagine your daughter's middle school invited you to give the commencement speech for the class when she graduated middle school, and if you can imagine what you would use that opportunity to share with the kids, not to put you on the spot, but what do you think you might pass on to young kids as they're about to kind of go on to high school and their path into life?
Go on to high school. I think that I would probably sort of divide it into two things. One is to not feel like you need to fit in at all costs, mm-hmm. that it's awesome to be different, and that you're allowed to go against what you think the norm is, and also to realize that it's not nearly as bad as they think it is.
Right. No, that's a great message. And I'd imagine some inspirational words would be also...
Did I pass?
It's not a pass-fail. It was a great answer. And I'd build on that and say that you might want to say things about, like, dream big dreams, don't be afraid to fail, try different things.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that all those messages that you'd convey in your daughter's class is basically the exact opposite of what we're teaching them during the school day. Because during the school day is like, behave, follow this schedule, there's no opportunity for choice, usually, right? And if you fail the test, you don't succeed. You can't dabble in different things. You can't dream big dreams. You do as you're told. The interesting thing about after school is that after school is really that time of day when kids actually do get to follow that advice. Because in after school, it's not mandatory for the children to participate, so they come from their own free will. We talk about giving kids a choice and a voice in the program where they can have an opportunity to choose what they want to learn. They have an opportunity to give a voice into what we teach them. And it's really, you can't fail after school.
Right.
You can fail school, you can't fail after school.
So they can suggest, like, if somebody specifically wants to do rock band competition, they can suggest that as something that gets added to the program?
So a big part, and we say that the kids vote with their feet. And I think one thing that maybe plays to our benefit is that the kids actually don't have to come. So the kids don't want to come, they don't show up. You can't force kids to go to after-school programs. I mean, the parents might force them, but you can't force them by law. So you have to make the programs relevant to the kids or they won't come. If you say, hey, we're just going to do 3 hours of math, guess what? No one's showing up.
Right.
And I think the interesting thing that we've learned is that how do you engage the kids in such a way that they actually want to come? We have programs where we had to make a rule where you have to come to school in order to go to after school, because kids were cutting school and showing up at 3 o'clock.
Well,
because that's the fun part of the day, and that's where their learning is really engaging.
So, given what we've been hearing, obviously the public education system is very much in the news right now.
Right.
Seems like for some people that might not be such a bad choice. I mean, honestly, not that you would want them to do that, but perhaps they're getting more from the after-school program educationally than they would be getting from the school day at any rate.
Right, possibly, but that's sad. I mean, that's something we need.
This is something we need to fix.
That's something we need to fix, and we've been struggling as a nation on how to fix the public education system, and it's somehow been eluding us how to fix public education in the core day.
Right.
And how to make our students competitive with their peers across the world, because currently they're not. You know, one interesting thing is that if you compare the amount of time that our kids go to school with their counterparts in Asian countries, we have a 180-day school year with a 6-hour typical school day. If you look at our counterparts in Asia, that's about 2 or 3 years less of education over K to 12.
Wow.
Just time on task.
Yeah, yeah.
The nice thing about after-school programs is that we actually increase the time that the kids are learning by 50%, because we add 3 hours every day,
right,
with about 1/10 of the cost of what it costs to provide education for the children all year.
So let me ask you a question. Does every child who wants to do this get to do it?
No. We are chronically underfunding after-school programs. So to put it in terms of how much we spend as a country in education, our annual budget for the whole nation on education is approximately $600 billion.
Right.
We put $1 billion into after-school programs. So you can probably calculate that percentage. I'll just say it's 1/600th.
That's fine.
But we're really underinvesting in after school, and it's a shame because it's a real opportunity to give the kids a lot more of an education for a small investment.
Right. So this is what I'm wondering. What is it about the way that we've set up the public school day that when you talk about showing children alternatives, encouraging their hopes and dreams, which in particular seems to me for inner city school kids to be so important, because these children don't see alternatives. Their dreams are crushed every day just by where they live. When you're talking about that, why is that not something that we can bring into the school day, particularly in this case where you're talking about how amazing this is for the children, and yet you can only serve 10% of the actual school kids, and what percentage of people actually get accepted that apply?
Well, you don't have to get accepted, you just can enroll. So it's open to every kid at the school.
But
the problem
is first come, first serve?
It's a first come, first serve, and we usually have a waiting list because our budget will only allow us to serve so many kids.
So how many kids are you turning away?
On a school by school, it's different. But you know, there are schools where we have room for 100 kids, and there might be 400 kids who want to enroll in the program. And
okay, so there are children who want to, or parents who either the children want to better their lives, the parents want to better their lives, and because of funding, they have no access to be able to actually execute the plan, which is heartbreaking for a parent who actually cares, right? Why can't we inspire our children within the school day?
That's a great question, and it's a very exciting time in public education because there's an active public discussion about education, which is not something that's always the case, right? So now, you know, if you've seen Waiting for Superman, or if you read the paper, every day there's articles written about, you know, the problems in public education. So I'm glad that we're having that discussion, and I'm glad, you know, Race to the Top has been a very interesting way to bring some reform to education, but, you know, we're still underserving our kids. I mean, one example is high school graduation rates. It's not a secret anymore that 50%, 50, not 15, but 50% of kids in low-income schools are not going to graduate high school. We have 1.2 million kids dropping out of high school every single year, which is 1 every 26 seconds, which is 138 kids during the course of your show tonight, this hour. 138 kids, if you do the math, will drop out of high school. So that's a devastating statistic for us. And we know the impact on the kids are 8 times more likely to be in prison. It's a loss over a career of $1 million in earnings. And it's just horrible.
Just merely by not graduating from high school.
The difference between what you would earn if you graduated high school versus
if you don't.
If you don't.
Is $1 million over.
I think actually it's $1 million if you graduate college versus drop out of high school.
Gotcha.
But it's a substantial loss of income for the kids, but there are also serious tolls that the community pays for children who drop out of high school in unemployment and incarceration and so on and so forth. So we as a nation have to solve this problem, and I'm glad there's discussions. You know, if it was an easy fix, we would have fixed it by now. But I do think that it's time for us to reform the education system.
So Do you feel, I mean, so one thing that is little known about you is that you founded a charter school, so which is one of the best charter schools in LA, actually, Larchmont Charter. There's a lot of kids, my children go to a private elementary school, and a lot of the kids transfer from that private school over to Larchmont after they get off the waiting list. But there's a huge waiting list. It's very difficult to get into, which is the case with all charters that are good, right? Do you feel like the answer is, let's go outside the system in some sense, which is what charters are doing? Right. You know, I mean, but they can't serve everybody. So how do we bring the charter model that seems to be working pretty well, you know, into the public school model, and then also inspire through what you're doing in after-school programs also, and get that into the day? Do you have any ideas about what the solution is?
Yeah, no, I have some thoughts on that. First of all, I'll say that I was one of many founders.
Yes,
so it was a group of parents. I think there were about 80 founding parents that kind of said, we want to start a charter school, and we want the middle class to get back engaged in public education, because the middle class, at least in our neighborhood, was writing off public schools and going to private schools. Let's get them back in. But we also created a school that's dedicated to diversity, so it's 50% low income, with the goal of having a socioeconomically diverse school.
Right.
I'm a big supporter of charter schools, and I think that it's a solution, but it's not the only solution. Charter schools today are about 5% of schools. I think there's approximately 5,000 schools that are charters. So you have to imagine the 90, even though it's an incredible number, that means 95% of schools are not charters.
Now, how many schools were charters 20 years ago? I mean, this is a relatively new trend,
is new, and I don't want to quote the year it started because I'm going to get it wrong, but it's a new phenomenon, relatively speaking. And look, some charter schools have underperformed, but generally in states that have good charter laws, and in states that actually de-charter failing charter schools, the charter schools are outperforming public schools. But charter schools were created in order to innovate in education, and we know now some of the key ingredients of getting it right. And I think the goal is to get charter schools is great as a parallel path, but we also have to have a path to fix public schools as well.
So that's the concern that I have, is that, as you say, charters were developed to innovate in education. What After School All-Stars is doing is obviously innovating in education. What you see from a lot of private schools is innovation in education. So you're seeing innovation all around the public schools, but not within the public schools. And from what I've heard from organizations that are trying to innovate, it's literally like a brick wall. They go in and they want to bring innovation into what the public school system is doing. I'm sorry, we can't do that because we have to make sure our children are passing these tests. And the way that change happens is it's just very intractable. It's very impervious to change what's happening in the public school system. Right. I don't know if that's because of the unions. I don't know if it's because of the existing boards. I don't know if it's because of federal law or state. I don't know where that's coming from, but perhaps you have some insight into why it is that while there's innovation happening all around that's clearly working. I mean, it's clear when you look at what's happening with charter schools, wow, that really works. You know, when you look at KIPP or what, wow, that really works. Look, we're taking kids that we thought couldn't succeed, and they're succeeding beautifully. Why doesn't anybody go, well, that's a no duh? We should obviously be modeling our public schools and creating that change within our public schools, and yet it just seems to not happen.
Yeah, no, that's a kind of why can't we fix it already kind of question. And,
when it seems like we know what the fixes are, it's not a problem that we don't know what we're supposed to do.
Exactly, and there's a lot of contributing factors, and it's hard to change a bureaucracy, and sometimes you just need kind of like to shake it up, and you need to have a paradigm shift. And one of the interesting things is that Race to the Top, which was under Obama and Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education.
So can you explain what that is for people who aren't?
Race to the Top took $4.3 billion into the Department of Education budget, and they dangled it in front of states, and they said, here's money that you can apply for if you follow the following criteria. And the criteria were really based on creating education reform on the state level, because education in this country is driven by the states. Yeah. So in the 2 years since Race to the Top has been created, there's been more reform in the state level on education issues than ever before, just because it incentivized in a very, what's the word I'm looking for, but it created an incentive system for states to actually create reform. And the reforms that states have created, only 12, by the way, states have have qualified.
Right.
Which has been a little controversial, but nevertheless, even states that didn't qualify for Race to the Top enacted a lot of reform, which included, discussions with unions and trying to create more accountability in the system. I mean, I think one of the things in order for our schools to be great is we have to have some accountability and we have to measure their success. Which is sort of what No Child Left Behind tried to accomplish. Through creating standards in education. I mean, before No Child Left Behind, there was no federal requirement to even measure success, and states by state made a determination on how they want to do it. Now they're required to measure success, so at least now in California, you know how schools are faring. Right. Of course, we're probably measuring the wrong things.
Yeah, well,
this
is the big issue, right? Yeah. You know what Race to the Top sounds like, Brian? It sounds like a sort of a mini X Prize. Doesn't it?
Does, definitely.
So we had Peter Diamandis on here a couple weeks ago, and of course his whole thing is that if you go within the system, you only ever get incremental change. But if you dangle prizes, in front of people, that you'll create big innovations and that you'll actually leverage the money really well. Because, for example, if you invest in cancer research directly in one solution, you're getting dollar for dollar return. But if you put up, say, a $10 million prize, for every dollar that you put up in prizing, you actually have $10 spent trying to win the prize, and you actually get to fund lots of different types of
It's very
solutions,
exciting.
right? So that sounds like what Race to the Top is.
Yeah,
Peter Diamandis would probably like that Race to the Top.
And I think we should see the federal, hopefully the federal government can take that kind of philosophy and apply it across different departments in the federal government, where you incentivize states to do the right thing by creating this RFP process where they can bid on funding based on enacting proper legislation.
Yeah, it seems like a good idea, because then they're going to be more likely to create change than if you do certain. One of the problems that I have with No Child Left Behind is that you're just teaching to a test.
A big challenge, and you obviously
and now the teachers are cheating for the children. Did you know that?
I did not.
You knew that, right? Did you know that, Brian?
No idea.
He's staying out of that one.
So the
Big
teachers,
problem.
so because everything's determined by how the children do on a test, they have proctors, right, who will go around and they'll kind of be glancing at the children's test papers, and they'll sort of go, you might want to redo number 6. Because the better the kids do, that determines how the school does and what kind of fun. It's a terrible system.
One of the devastating outcomes, I think, and perhaps unintended outcomes of No Child Left Behind was, I believe it's 71% of schools across the country have reduced the amount of extracurricular activities that they provide. Because they're measured. I mean, if you're measured, you're going to actually focus your energy on what you're being held accountable for.
Right, as opposed to what you guys do, which is probably more valuable, particularly to the kids that you're servicing.
So we picked, reading, writing, and math as what we measure through No Child Left Behind. So guess what? Schools stopped offering history, art, music, PE in a lot of cases. And so it's such a horrible way to go to school, where all the focus is on reading and math scores, with teachers who in some cases just teach to pass the test rather than use pedagogical skills to inspire kids to be better learners.
Right, which is the big concern that I have. So, the other thing that I feel like is that what No Child Left Behind does is it creates sort of fact-based learning, right? That you're learning a set of facts that you're then going to spew back. And one of the things I remember when a long time ago, I was at a symposium, someone was talking about the fact that our textbooks are something like 5 or 6 times as thick as textbooks of kids in for example, Japan. And in like Norwegian countries or whatever, where education is a lot better. And the reason why they didn't have thick textbooks is because they weren't filled with facts. They were filled with workshops and problem-solving exercises and ways to caucus with your peers in order to come up with a solution and things like that. And that was actually creating much better learners, much better thinkers. And in America, all we care about is if you know 2 + 2.
Yeah, no, that's a problem. I mean, speaking of textbooks, I know that the state of California is looking at, overhauling that whole thing. And, why have the process of creating and getting a textbook approved is so archaic when the facts on the ground change on a daily basis.
Particularly nowadays with technology,
you know what it takes to take Pluto out as a planet from all the textbooks? Whereas, why don't you put an iPad in front of every kid and you can have everything updated in real time? So, I hope to see a lot more innovation in the way we teach kids that incorporate new technology into
So are
the
children
classrooms.
still using textbooks with Pluto as a planet? That's
Well,
we need to find that out.
Depending on when the last time their textbooks have been updated,
Right.
right?
So let's talk statistics. These kids go through your program. They're living in an area where the dropout rate is 50% or more, right? I think in inner city LA it's higher than 50%, right?
On a school by school, there's 2,000 schools, high schools across the country that have been deemed the dropout factories, where they actually are accountable for most of the dropouts. And there's these failing high schools in many of the urban centers in the country.
Right. So you now hit these kids at middle school. First of all, my question is, if they're dropping out of high school, why are you hitting them at middle school, right?
I'm glad you asked that, and that's a great question, and you wouldn't normally even think why that is. And here's the reason. Kids drop out of high school, it all starts in that first test in 9th grade that you fail. What happens is kids are not passing English or math in 9th grade, and then they retake the exam and they fail again, and what happens is a lot of them are failing 9th grade, and then they repeat 9th grade, and there's this phenomena called the 9th grade bulge and the 10th grade dip, where 9th grades are getting bloated because they're the incoming kids, and then all the kids repeating 9th grade. And 10th grades are getting tiny because only about half of the kids are making it into 10th grade.
So is the failure in 9th grade a result of kids being sort of shuttled through to 8th grade and then offloaded onto the high school?
That's one of the problems. And one of the things, we've created a program called We Are Ready, which is a year-long curriculum with a final summer program called Campus, with the sole focus of preparing middle school kids for high school. And it's simple things. It's not brain surgery. It's like, let's go visit your high school. Let's see where you're going to study. Let's create a one-on-one mentor for you, a junior, that when you come into school, there'll be one kid that can actually be accountable for you and help you. Let's give you all those things that private school kids get, like study skills and organization skills and active listening skills. It's simple things that would help kids actually not get lost when they transition into high school. And we did a panel of 8th graders just to kind of learn a little bit what's going through their head. And a lot of the kids, I think we had 6 kids on the panel, and 5 of them said, when we asked them, what do you think about when you think about high school? And they said, we're scared.
Well, yeah, sure. Those kids are big.
But how about if we take them to the school and we show them what their environment's going to be like, and we introduce them to some kids in the school? Like most of the fear is from the unknown. So you can demystify that, and you can prepare the kids properly for 9th grade. Hopefully they'll pass 9th grade, and if they pass 10th grade, the likelihood of graduating high school then skyrockets.
Oh, okay.
So you got to get them through 9th.
So you have to get them past 10th grade. So
most
you're
kids don't drop out of high school in 11th or 12th grade. If they made it that far, they'll
So you're focusing on middle school to mainly to get them to, because by the time once 9th grade is lost, you've lost the kid.
Right, and
so
the focus on middle school goes beyond just graduating high school. It's also that age where kids can really use a positive mentor in their life.
Right.
And we say in After School All-Stars that the kids come from the program, they come for the program, but they stay for the staff, because they create those incredible relationships with positive role models that are really critical in that age, 12, 13.
So what have you seen happen, the kids who graduate your program, what are you seeing happen with dropout rates later? Have you done any longitudinal studies on that?
So the high school graduation program is a new program that we started about a year ago, and we're following our kids. They're now all going through 9th grade. The data on our program in general is that it increases the likelihood of graduating just generally when you participate in our program. It increases the school attendance, it reduces negative behavior, and it increases children's math and reading scores. And the interesting thing is, and I like to say it like this, more academics doesn't always yield better academic outcomes.
Well, no.
But a combination of academics and enrichment program does.
Right.
And that's because kids are more excited, they're more engaged, they're more active, and they're more connected to where they are.
Is there any questions from the people in the chat room?
There's not any direct questions. They're
comments?
Mulling it over.
They're all like, no, they're like in zombie land over there.
They're in zombie land over there.
They tuned in to hear about pot and zombies. And here we are.
Well, listen, you know, you have to get to the people no matter how you can. That's the key, right?
Yes, somebody was sharing that their astronomy book still counted Pluto.
Their astronomy book still counts Pluto as a planet, which seems impossible in this day and age of instant access, right? So we have time for one short question. obviously you're doing this great work. You're running this amazing organization, which people may not know, but was founded by the governor.
Right.
Just so that people are aware. Which, by the way, is a nice segue for the pot. I'm going to remember that as my segue section. So how did you end up getting in the nonprofit world? Because I'm always very interested in people who are doing great things in nonprofit, how they ended up there.
I'll try to answer briefly, but I think you might know, Annie, I grew up in Israel.
Yes.
I moved here after serving for 4 years in the Israeli Army.
Don't get in hand-in-hand comment with him, by the way, because he was one of those, in the Army in Israel. So.
But when I moved to the United States, it was going to be like for a visit, and here I am 20 years later, never went back. But when I first moved here, I had to work through college, work through graduate school, and I became an entrepreneur. And I was lucky in the early 90s to jump on the real estate when it was at a low, and I did fairly well. And then when I realized that just pursuing, financial outcomes wasn't a very satisfying way to lead your life, I realized that I wanted to get involved in the public sector. And my family is a family of educators, and the education sector seemed like the right place for me to spend my time. And so I was just fortunate enough that at the time this foundation was looking to hire somebody with a business background to be the chief operating officer, and that was my way in. And I love my job, and I'm really glad that I ended up working in the nonprofit. It's very satisfying.
I just think that's great. You go out in business and then you apply those skills to actually doing a lot of good in the world. I love hearing the stories of how people get involved in doing great things in nonprofit. Some people come to it late. So we had someone who decided when they were 20 in here that they were going to do that, which is incredible. Well, I know that you can't stay because of the topic matter. It would be a little odd for you to be. Listen, I educate middle school kids, and I also think they should all be smoking pot all the time. How are you going to segue into that, right? So we appreciate you coming in, telling us about the great news. For people who would like to educate themselves more about what After School All-Stars does, or perhaps donate, since they're underfunded, can you tell them how they should go about doing that? Yeah, sure.
I mean, you can go online. It's as-as.org, and you can donate online and read a lot more about the work that we're doing. We're also on Facebook and Twitter.
Yes, and Twitter is at Brian. Can you put their Twitter in? It's at ASAS.
Dash AS, I think.
I think it's at ASAS After School.
Okay. You probably know better than I do.
I'm pretty sure that's it, because I think I double-checked today so that I would have it.
Thank you for doing that.
I'm like the social media queen. Thank you so much for being here. So I should need to unhook. And, all right. Are you inspired, Brian?
I am inspired. And speaking of segues, we're going to go from that.
Well, so here's the segue. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, I don't know if people remember, but do you remember when he was like the celebrity spokesperson for the physical fitness? Do you remember when you used to get the President's Medal for physical fitness?
I didn't grow up in the... No, yeah.
Yeah, remember? Yeah. Do you remember that when you used to have to do all the physical things in school and you'd get the medal and you'd have to run and, Yeah, so he did that, and then anyway, through that and sort of seeing, physical fitness and what that was doing for, anyway, he founded After School All-Stars. So Arnold Schwarzenegger founded After School All-Stars, and he's really been in the news lately because of, he just decriminalized marijuana in California, so the fine is now $100, as long as it's less than an ounce, right? For less than an ounce. And he also didn't he just say, I think he was just saying that he supported Prop 19. Didn't he say that? Am I wrong?
I believe what he exactly said was no one cares if you're smoking a joint. But he still didn't like Prop 19. He, of course, didn't support it when it might have mattered. He still doesn't support it now. My question is, if no one cares if you smoke a joint, which I understand no one should, then why does anyone care if you are selling a joint, which is
a whole question.
The big issue that people, I think, stumble on.
So we're going to get into this question. See, I did come up with a segue because of the governor.
The governor.
I'm very proud of my segues on this show, Brian. Just saying. I like to segue from the serious interview to the discussion. So Brian Doherty from Reason Magazine and Reason.com. And then Stephen, can you hear us now?
I can hear you great.
Okay, great. So we got Stephen Gutwillig from the Drug Policy Alliance. So Brian in the corner. Oh, and then we have Colin.
Yeah, explain who I am.
I'm sorry, Colin. Let me just say, Colin is on another show on the network, actually, called This Week in Poker.
Yep.
He also happens to be one of the producers of this show, and he does a great imitation of someone who's high.
Do I?
Which is, you do.
All I have to say is I'm really hungry right now, and I'm not high. So I was just thinking, like, as I was waiting, I was like, I'm starving. We just came in from Vegas, and I'm not high, though.
Right, so we originally, just so people know, originally Ben, we for some silly reason thought that Ben was going to participate in the discussion, because we usually make our interviews participate in the discussion because we like to make people uncomfortable, but we didn't realize we'd be making him a little too uncomfortable by having him talk about pot. Can you frame the discussion for, I think we have a video though, right? Do we have a clip to show?
We can show that if we want.
Let's show the clip.
It's why it's a ballot measure, Bill, because no politician, even if they thought it was a good idea. Oh my God. Yeah, as I was saying.
We went there. I'm gonna pass the mic. Wow.
How's your back?
He has an exact, gap. Okay. One thing I'm going to throw out there is that I have some friends who've been growers in Humboldt County, and the growers in Humboldt County are getting out the vote against the proposition.
Right.
And honestly, I think
right,
that this
because
is one
the
of
profit,
Right.
when you have prohibition, just like liquor with Al Capone,
look, that is
a lot higher.
That is totally legit, but I personally
look at those dragons!
No.
But that's my point. I think that's what people think of it.
Right.
You know,
but I think that there is a legitimate issue here.
Exactly right.
You know, I think the only thing that would have made that clip better if he said, "Oh my God, look at those zombies!"
Yeah.
Because then it would have really been great for the show. So can you frame...
vampires.
Or vampires, right? Although I think if you were high, you'd be more likely to see zombies.
You're sold on that.
I don't know. Can you frame the discussion for us, O'Brien in the corner?
I will. I've got. I normally have some fast facts. Today
Yes.
they're not so fast.
Okay, well, read them fast like that FedEx commercial from when I was growing up.
Prop 19 would have legalized pot in California and allow local government to tax it. It would have allowed people 21 years or older to possess, cultivate, or transport marijuana for personal use, and permit local governments to regulate and tax commercial production and sale of pot to people 21 years or older. Proponents claim that Prop 19 would have generated $1.4 billion in tax revenue a year. However, the act itself does not establish a statewide regulatory or tax framework, so any estimate here is really just a wild guess. Proponents argue that prohibition makes pot expensive and thus profitable for gangs to get involved and kill over it. If legalized, the price of pot would drop dramatically, within some estimates going from $300 to $40. Opponents argue that Prop 19 is poorly drafted and deeply flawed, and is filled with loopholes that would create a chaotic nightmare for law enforcement, local governments, and businesses. And then I have, even if pot becomes legal in California under state law, it would still be illegal under federal law, and the Department of Justice has said it will still prosecute violators of federal drug laws.
Well, that's a weird catch-22, isn't it, right? California says it's fine, but then the feds come in and arrest you for growing it. I guess I want to sort of have people sort of answer in turn. Why do people care? That's my question. Why do people care if someone in their house smokes a joint? That's what I want to know.
That's an amazingly good question. I think Mr. Galifianakis, or whatever the heck his name is, was hinting at it. People just have really weird opinions about what the use of marijuana does to people. I think it's weird that people still have those weird opinions, because half the people in the state have used pot. Everyone in the state knows people who've used pot, whether they know it or not. I mean, we should understand that this drug's effects are not that extreme. They're certainly less extreme in many ways than alcohol, which we've become quite comfortable with many people using.
Or cigarettes, frankly.
Yeah. People are weird about marijuana. That's what I've learned in writing about it. It makes them uncomfortable, it disturbs them, but we've definitely seen the trend in the polling that it's making them less and less uncomfortable as time goes by. I mean, this proposition got the highest percentage of a vote of any time a state has had the chance to vote on legalization. The polling keeps getting better. If the people who have the money to keep getting these things on the ballot keep doing it, and I think they will, we're definitely I think we're very likely to see something like 19 pass within the next decade.
Okay, so Stephen, a lot of the objections that I was reading really came from people saying, well, you know, but this doesn't allow any way to regulate it, really. It's not really putting in a structure. So we're just going to have sort of this legal mayhem. Are they misframing it? Where do you think the opposition was right? Where do you think the opposition was wrong? Were they wholly wrong?
Well, the opposition primarily focused on misrepresenting Proposition 19, because that's, of course, what the drug war status quo does. You know, they promote fear tactics that keep us from adopting reforms that we should have adopted years ago. And in the case of Proposition 19, they very interestingly did nothing to defend the status quo, because they did a certain amount of research and they determined that people understand, by and large, that what we're doing to control marijuana today has failed utterly, that marijuana is more widely available, more potent and cheaper than it ever has been, despite enormous resources spent to ban it outright, and that it's universally accessible to any young person that wants to get their hands on it. So they focused on some of the details of Proposition 19, and they said it was poorly written, and that the feds would never allow its implementation, and then they threw in some pretty awful scare tactics that focused on road safety, highway safety, and workplace safety, which really were, those were essentially made up. And that Proposition 19 was a relatively modest reform because as Brian alluded to, by allowing local governments to decide for themselves whether to regulate sales of marijuana to adults, that meant that city councils and boards of supervisors were going to have to make those decisions under enormous local scrutiny, and that was a recipe for very conservative outcomes.
Which is basically the way that alcohol is done now, right? Because you have dry counties.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, there's not so many.
The local chaos argument was nonsense. I mean, all sorts of things, from gambling, to alcohol, to guns. Yeah. Regulation of all those things tends to be done in the local level.
I was actually thinking, like, I live in Hermosa Beach, and there's an area where all the bars are, and every Friday, Saturday night at 2 a.m. they all come out, all the drunk meatheads. And what do? They get
in their car, right?
No, they get in fights.
Oh, they get in fights.
They all fight.
Yeah, I told
I think these bars should actually have a policy where you have to get high before you leave the bar.
That's actually what's that. I said this. My daughter was talking about it. It's really funny because I realized that I hadn't talked to them about this very much. But she said, "Oh, I think I'm against Prop 19." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, because pot's really bad and it hurts people, and people will do bad things if they're on pot." And I said, "Well, what makes you say that?" I said, "Nobody's ever killed anybody when they were high. They're too busy eating Cheetos. Like, if it's when they're drunk or on crystal meth." So my daughter said something really interesting. By the end of the conversation, she was actually for Prop 19, but she said, "But Mom, I don't understand. You don't smoke pot. Why would you be for it?" And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, and I thought, well, maybe people are confused that if they don't smoke pot, then they should definitely be against it, and maybe that's part of the problem, is they can't separate out the two issues.
I think you can be against pot and still be for legalizing too.
I don't want my children smoking pot, and I don't smoke pot, but I'm for Prop 19 because I think that people should be able to choose these things for themselves.
One of the things that we learned in the survey that we did that Brian referred to earlier was that more than 30% of the people who voted against Prop 19 actually favor legalizing marijuana in California.
So it was just misinformation on the part of the opposition? What caused that to happen?
It's not entirely clear. Some of it had to do with objections that they had to specific components of the initiative, and some of it probably had to do with fear of change. That this is the first time that Californians have had an opportunity to change these pot laws, and some of it may have to do with the governor recently signing the legislation that you alluded to earlier that downgraded low-level marijuana possession from a misdemeanor to an infraction, although the penalties didn't change at all. It always has been, since 1975, a $100 fine with no jail time. But we'll probably never know entirely why so many people who favor marijuana legalization on paper didn't vote in favor of Proposition 19. But it does suggest that we are getting closer and closer to ending decades of total failure in marijuana policy in California and around the country, especially when you look at the demographics, because by far the most supportive segment of among voters were voters under 30, and by far the most hostile to Proposition 19 were voters in the oldest, elderly voters.
So we just have to wait for them all to die.
That's the direction that these things tend to go in, that there's an enormous generational appeal. Newsweek did a poll just last week that indicated that 70% of voters under 30 around the country would support a Proposition 19 in their state. It really is moving in a direction toward what we would consider to be common sense reform, that marijuana, which is objectively less harmful than either alcohol or tobacco, really needs to be regulated, because this isn't about creating a free-for-all or even condoning the consumption of marijuana. It doesn't need to be about that. It's simply about saying that a substance that's as widely available and as widely consumed as marijuana already is needs to be regulated in order to prevent this enormous black market from expanding any further, and in order to prevent the harms that are associated with marijuana from being magnified, because that's what happens when you drive consumption underground by banning it outright.
So I have a question, because I had this discussion with my 10-year-old, right? And actually all of my children were in the car, and I said, well, there's this issue of direct harm. Is something doing direct harm to another individual, or is the person only harming themselves? And generally, when something's not doing direct harm to another individual, the government doesn't stick their nose in it. I said, but there's this interesting question of societal harm, right? That when we deem that there's going to be such a great societal harm to something, then we'll usually sort of bypass the direct harm. Now, I think we can probably agree in the case of pot, the only real harm that's coming from pot is from the fact that it's illegal in the first place, right? So
substance abuse is harm, right?
Well, it's only harm to the individual.
No, but there's a cost on our society.
Right, so it's not, you have to, this is the question that I have. So in the case of pot, it's mainly issues from the fact that we've made it illegal, right? So you have, illegal trade. So can we agree, because I had this discussion with my kids and I said, well, I think we could all agree that maybe crystal meth is different, right? That when you look at what's happening in terms of, when people are on crystal meth, they actually do kill people. It's a terrible drug. It's very highly addictive. It ruins your teeth, which we don't want to become like England. Yeah. And so you being sort of on the libertarian stance, do you think in the end we should just have a complete free-for-all, and people, if they want to shoot up crystal meth, they should be allowed to?
I think all the political reasons why marijuana should be legal apply to every other substance as well. It comes down to what you alluded to earlier. Do we think that just because we disapprove of something or we think something's dangerous, then we should pay through the nose to have a bunch of people out there with guns, fining people for possessing the stuff, arresting people for selling the stuff? I don't think there's any warrant for that.
But what happens when you put crystal meth in the hands of big business, whose job is to create demand? Mm-hmm. And we know that crystal meth is incredibly toxic to the body and to the brain and to society.
Can you imagine, given our current cultural attitude towards crystal meth, that any big business is actually going to try to get in the business of selling that substance?
I do, because they sell high fructose corn syrup.
I can't imagine.
But I think that's a good question for marijuana. Yeah. Obviously, if marijuana became legal, and we talked about this, it's not becoming legal, it's becoming commercialized. So there's an incentive, and I think that's why you saw a lot of, I just looked this up, so if I seem smart about it. But actually a big number of people in Northern California voted against Prop 19 because they feared competition. Right now,
so this is what he was talking about with Humboldt County on the clip.
Yeah, they voted against it. So you'd have big businesses, come in. I would.
So were you concerned at all, Stephen, that George Soros all of a sudden jumped in and donated so much money to the cause? I mean, we can assume that he's not doing it just for personal libertarian reasons that there's probably some sort of commercial drive behind his choice, right?
No, there's not. He absolutely is doing it for.
You think so?
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Okay,
I will take that. Yeah, absolutely. George Soros is not in the business of selling commodities. George Soros is a trader. George Soros also sees himself as somewhat of a philosopher king. He absolutely does these things because he thinks it's the right thing to do.
Okay, fair enough. We have it. Do you defend him as well?
Oh, of course. I mean, we were actually the recipient
Yeah.
of that money.
That's why I took that question, because Stephen's organization is actually highly funded by Mr. Soros. Mine, as far as I know, is not. So, yeah, no, he's not doing this because he wants to be in the business of selling marijuana.
So he's doing it from a purely libertarian standpoint.
He's not a pure libertarian, but he's pretty good on drug issues. No one, if California is the only state to legalize marijuana, no big business is going to be able to get into it. They'd be facing enormous problems with the federal government until it's nationally legalized.
Really?
Yeah.
But even gambling doesn't necessarily have that issue.
That is true. So, Stephen, I mean, do you feel like there should be a line drawn between something like crystal meth and pot?
We have a position that is similar to but different from what Brian just articulated. We do think that marijuana is exceptional in the extent that it is already widely available, widely consumed. The harms associated with it are substantially lower than other substances that we already regulate, tax, control, and educate around. And so that marijuana is a no-brainer. It really should be. It should be made legal and should be controlled in that way. Where we perhaps differ with what Brian Doherty just said is that the main issue with drug policy in our culture is the extent to which criminalizing personal use is the core of the drug policy. Okay. That the drug war is overwhelmingly a war against individuals and families based on individual drug use. And that not only is bankrupting states like California, which spends $1 billion a year, incarcerating 30,000 drug possession offenders alone. I mean, that is just drug possession offenders. But not only are we bankrupting the states, but we're exacerbating the harms that are caused by those drugs by using criminal justice solutions instead of health-centered approaches to deal with what most of us, if not all of us, agree are primarily health issues. People, by and large, who use all drugs do that without hurting themselves or other people and should just be left alone. The people who need help should get help, which does not include a jail or a prison cell. People need help not being put in cages where we are wasting enormous amounts of money. And the whole question of how you move from shifting from a criminal justice centered approach to drug use and drug misuse to, well, then how are people supposed to access drugs if drugs are legal is a very complicated question. Brian suggested one solution, which is creating a market for the sale and distribution, manufacture of all drugs. We kind of think that you should take one drug at a time, weigh the harms associated with each substance, and then act accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, because I just have this issue that there's a way to say, okay, well, clearly when you take something like pot, the harm is just from the illegal activity itself and from the way that we happen to treat somebody who uses it. I mean, certainly Texas is a shining example of perhaps over-punishing through the criminal justice system. But I think that there are some drugs, like crystal meth, where it's clear that the people who use it, the majority, not just the majority, but almost 100% of people who are using crystal meth actually are addicted to it. Whereas with pot, the addiction rates, I imagine, are lower than alcohol, which is 7 to 9% of the using population, right? So is there some line that we want to cross where we say, look, you allow this in a legal way, and I understand that illegalizing it doesn't necessarily bar access. So how do you sort of say, okay, well, if we want to change the way that we treat drug use and we want to change the way that we're dealing with it through the criminal justice system and move it into the health system, what do you do about drugs that clearly have such devastating effects that you would want to make sure that the population didn't really have access to it?
You're right that there's a spectrum of harms associated with different drugs. However, we have a one-size-fits-all solution, which is prohibition and wasteful, punitive responses through the criminal justice system, which I'm sure you also won't be surprised to hear are uniformly race-based.
Yes.
In their selective enforcement. And because that's, of course, the other fundamental truth about the drug war in this country is that it is a war not just on people and families, but on black and brown people and families and communities all across the country. And we have so much work to turn around a system that emphasizes law enforcement, interdiction, and so de-emphasizes access to treatment as an alternative to incarceration, and education, that we don't need to argue at this point about which drugs need to be restricted more than others, because there's so much we have years and years of work ahead of us to unring the bell on this extraordinary failure of the drug war, which supermajorities of Americans agree is a disaster, yet we are just at the very margins of undoing, and that's why ending marijuana prohibition is so crucial. Not just because the laws that ban outright marijuana, that outright ban marijuana, are such failures in and of themselves, but they represent this opportunity to start undoing the worst.
On a small scale, with a drug that we know is not particularly harmful and is certainly less harmful than drugs that are readily available right now. Do the people at home have?
An interesting comment from a viewer, Scarlett. If legalization happens, how do you guys think that will alter our culture in America?
Well, I think in regards to pot, not much, right? I mean, isn't pot a pretty integral part of our culture now?
Unquestionably. If California's pot use rates doubled after legalization, it would get back to the level that it was in the late 70s. So we've already lived through a culture.
We don't want to go back to the late 70s, do
You know what?
I mean,
they made some bad movies
then,
but I think the cocaine was mostly to blame for that.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So yeah, we absolutely... We do live in a very marijuana-saturated culture. It's just we're all hypocritical and strange about it. Yeah, I certainly don't think there'd be any enormous change. It would be a great change if we lived in a culture where people didn't instantly think, as Annie alluded earlier, that because I don't like something means we should hire a bunch of people with guns to go out and fine and throw people in jail for it. It's terrible. It's un-American. It has nothing to do with what this country is here for. And to start squeezing that mentality out of people, I think would be a great change for the better.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say my pot smoking days ended in college. Of course, when I was in high school, you had to roll something about this thick to get high, which
You're still taking college classes?
I am. So that's funny. That's not true, kids at home. No, I really did. One day I just realized that I felt really stupid when I was doing it. So I moved into heroin. It was much more effective. That was the thing. But I actually, this is a drug that I haven't used in forever, and I'm confused by it. So, I mean, I'm confused by people even caring. For me, I would actually, if you were going to have prohibition, I'd rather go back to prohibiting alcohol.
Yeah.
Because God knows people, when they're high on pot, they just drive really slow.
Yeah, I never.
But on alcohol, they're like, I drive better when I'm drunk, and they're like mowing people down. I mean, if I have a choice about who I want behind the wheel. Here's an interesting question. I think you brought it up last week when we started talking about it. If you were sitting in a park and you had a rowdy group of kids drinking alcohol on one side and a rowdy group of kids smoking pot on the other, who would you move toward?
Yeah.
So speaking of rowdy kids smoking pot.
Depends if I want us to be mellow or rowdy.
Well, no, I'd feel more threatened by the drunk kids. Yeah. I mean, I think that we all would.
Like I said, at bars, they should make people smoke pot
before they leave.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, then they drive really slow on the way home. They'd be much less likely to hurt anybody. And by the way, it would be Cheetos, if pot becomes legal, should get into the pot business. They should have because people will eat more Cheetos.
Could you imagine 7-Eleven if they could sell pot? And
oh my God, that would be Starbucks could start smelling. They're going to start selling beer and wine. Yeah. They could sell joints, and then people would eat those crappy baked goods they have. Yeah. It would be excellent for them. So on that note, zombies or vampires? You have to take a side, Brian.
Vampires.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't look like a 14-year-old girl, though.
Yeah, well,
are you a twihard? Are you a secret twihard?
I've never seen Twilight. My vampire following days ended in the 70s. You know, I'm Dracula, Count Chocula, you know,
well,
the
Count
Count
Chocula,
on Sesame
that's
Street.
True, by the way.
I'm a big fan of all of those. You know, vampires are, you know, having a certain intelligence and suaveness. I mean, they're both dead.
Well, that's
they
because
both have
the
to live off of the
by
living.
definition, their brains are no longer functioning beyond their brainstem.
That's
so
less
I think
interesting
it's
to
unfair.
me. Being brainless, it's less interesting to me.
All right, Steven, zombies or vampires?
That's a no-brainer.
Nice.
I only made it through one season of True Blood, but I would still pick vampires for all the reasons that Brian just said. I mean, they're verbal. And zombies are pretty one-dimensional, and it gets a little boring after a while.
All right, well, I'm going zombies, by the way.
Well,
Yeah, well, we talked about it before. It's not about like who you would want to be. Obviously,
Right.
you'd want to be.
I'd rather be a vampire.
But as far as like culture, like I would rather see.
Culturally, I like zombies.
Yeah, I'd rather
better.
see more zombies.
I'd rather be a vampire. I'd rather deal with vampires.
Vampires are too European to me.
That's
Yeah.
true,
You know?
by the way. They are.
Yeah.
Vampires are Euro trash. You have to admit that.
Yeah.
Well, I think we kind of turned the tables on that in the last. But all this, you know,
like he's a vampire.
culture, you know, vampire stuff in the last couple of years has been about reclaiming the, you know, vampire identity for the USA.
Well, okay, that's one way to
But
look
they
at it.
still look European.
You know what it is? You know what my problem is? I think that zombie movies are more appealing to mature audiences. Like, when I think of zombie movies, Shaun of the Dead, which kicks Twilight's ass, for sure, right? It's great. The Walking Dead is obviously better
Brilliant,
than brilliant, right? And then you know, I think Night of the Living Dead. These are all better movies than Twilight.
That's the thing too with vampires. You don't have to worry about maybe one or two at a given time. Zombies, it's like the whole
That's
28
true.
days or
That's true.
The Walking
28
Dead.
Days Later, that was another brilliant movie,
Because it
right?
takes 100 zombies to be worth one vampire. That's.
That, by the way, that might be definitively true.
Yeah.
But I do like that we're claiming vampires for America because they've been so European and effete, and now we've got a real American vampires in the South.
Yeah.
Right, riding motorcycles.
I think it's time for Rocky, like a Rocky vampire.
A Rocky vampire.
Sylvester
Who
Stallone.
punches out a decaying Eastern European.
Punches out a decaying Eastern European. Next week on the show, thank you very much, Stephen, by the way, and thank you so much, Brian, for being here. We really appreciated your perspective on the topic. Let me ask you one more thing before we say what we're going to do next week. Do you think that the failure of Prop 19 helps or hurts 2012?
I think we're in a much better position today than we were a year ago because, you know, basically, undoubtedly, this has been a watershed moment, and that Proposition 19 has permanently impacted the national debate and placed marijuana legalization squarely in the mainstream of American politics.
Now, do you think it helps or hurts 2012?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it would have been better had it won, but it didn't still the energies of the people dedicated to getting it passed. I think it opened up some new alliances in the community pushing for it. You got civil rights organizations behind it now, labor unions. It's not just drug policy intellectuals any longer, and hopefully politicians are beginning to see that an issue that 50% polled support, 46% will go to the polls and vote for, is not something that they need to run scared from. People like Schwarzenegger, who understand obviously that there's no reason for the war on drugs anymore, will be brave enough to say so in the future.
Did it fail because people were too high to get out and vote?
Well, it failed because
I'm joking.
the midterm election, young people don't
vote.
out.
That's why. So we have to wrap because there's a thing on the screen saying wrap. Next week.
I don't have to actually rap though, right?
No, you do. That would be great if you had to rap. Next week we've got Joe Navarro, right? Who is Joe Navarro is a really interesting guy. He was an FBI interrogator who's now written a lot of books on reading body language.
Okay.
Pretty interesting dude, right? And our panel is TBA. We haven't decided what we're going to talk about, although I suggested, why is Nancy Pelosi such a megalomaniacal douche? That was the word that I used.
Could you bring Dave Navarro on to be with Joe Navarro?
We should have Dave Navarro, who looks a little like a vampire, you know, because he does
exactly.
right? He could be on True Blood, right? Thank you so much. That's the show for today. Please join in the discussion on Prop 19 and get yourself and go out and get educated, and go to afterschoolallstars.org, ASASallstars.org, right?
Yes.
Okay, you'll put that in the chat room, right?
Yes.
So that you can educate yourself about education as well. Thank you for being here. That's it.